So, on the cultural section, I want to bring together two themes of the show, reality and Easter, because Good Friday is the prelude, the tragic prelude to the joy of Easter. And I was thinking about, when I was talking to Greg Laurie last week about his film Jesus Revolution, which I really liked, but I was still thinking about why, in general, Christian movies don't move me all that much. And I was thinking it's because they do not show reality. They don't show the way people really are. They'll show people who have a flaw or do a bad thing, but they don't show how inherently flawed we are. I was comparing them in my mind to romantic comedies. Romantic comedies are not the most realistic stories in the world. They're kind of happily ever after stories. But at the same time, if you look at the great romantic comedies, look at Philadelphia Story, Harry Met Sally, the first few seasons of Cheers, one of the really great romantic narratives with Sam and Diane, if you look at those, the people in them they're not just flawed, they're us, they're small, they're stupid, they're governed by sex and greed and personal ambition and neurosis, they're neurotics, and yet love flourishes in the midst of those things. And when I was talking about King Lear and The Tempest, I was showing how Shakespeare pours Christian truths into tragedies, into things with terrible, the guy's eyes are being put out, and you think, well, where's the happy Christian talk here? There's nowhere, and yet Christ is there. So I wanted to take a look at some movies for the Easter season that weren't religious movies, and yet were filled with Jesus. They were movies about Jesus, and yet movies about Jesus that include all the flaws and even evil of human beings, and aren't squeaky clean and aren't G-rated or anything like that. So the first one I thought of is a movie that many people don't know about, which I just think is absolutely wonderful. It's a small movie, but it's a wonderful film. If you've never seen it, 1961, it's called Whistle Down the Wind. I think at one point Andrew Lloyd Webber made a musical out of it, but I don't think it ever went anywhere. But it is a wonderful little film. It's based on a novel by a lady named Mary Haley Bell. And Mary Haley Bell was married for like 60 years, one of the great showbiz marriages, to an excellent British actor named John Mills, a very famous British actor in his day. And Mary Haley Bell and John Mills had two daughters. One was an actress named Juliet Mills, who was in a TV show for a while here called Nanny and the Professor, but the other was Haley Mills, right? Putting the two names together, Haley Mills, and she was a big Disney child star. She was in a film called Pollyanna, which is still a good film. If you haven't seen it, your kids would love that film if they're younger. And Haley Mills, a very beautiful young girl, and she plays a little girl in this film, Whistle Down the Wind, that also has Alan Bates, a great, great actor in his first starring role. And it's about a bunch of local school children in the Lancaster villages around a farm. And one day, there's a fugitive hiding in the barn of one of these kids. It's Alan Bates, and he's wounded. He's got a knock on his head. And one day, Haley Mills walks into the barn, and she hears somebody in the barn. She's scared, right? And she says, "Who is it?" And just as she says, "Who is it?" the fugitive passes out. And as he passes out, he says, "Jesus Christ," and he collapses. And Haley Mills, being a little child, she thinks Jesus Christ is hiding in the barn. And that's the story. The story is this fugitive is hiding in the barn, and the word spreads throughout all the little children of the neighborhood that Jesus Christ is hiding in the barn. And the conflict is between the realism, but also the cynicism of the adults, and the falsehood, but also the faith of the children. And you can see the children's kind of rudimentary faith in this sign here, in this scene here. It's cut 8.
Who's got to look after them then?
Jesus.
Don't talk wet.
Yes, he will then, because that woman told me.
What woman?
The woman in the Sally Harvey. That woman. I asked her to look after it, and he said Jesus would look after it for me.
Well, what's she know about it?
She knows because she lives in his house.
How can she when he's dead?
Oh, Aunt Cathy.
Well, what's up? He is, isn't he?
Well, Francis saying you'll have something terrible happening now.
Yes, you just wait till Jesus comes and gets you.
I'm not bothered. It's only talk.
She has this worried look up at the sky with Jesus going to come and get her. And the thing is obviously their faith is, as I say, simple and misguided, but still their faith finds a truth that is higher than the truth of the world that they're living in. The world is still the world, but there is a truth higher than that, and the children see it when the adults can't. It's a beautiful movie, Whistle Down the Wind. Another one is one of a personal favorite movie of mine, Cool Hand Luke. If you've never seen this picture, especially if you're a guy, it's a great guys movie, 1967, starring the terrific Paul Newman, one of the great stars of that era. Cool Hand Luke is just a terrific picture, and it's got beautiful music. And Whistle Down the Wind has a beautiful theme in it too. The music in Cool Hand Luke is by Lalo Schifrin, who you know from Mission Impossible. He was a very prolific, terrific writer, and the theme is Down Here on the Ground. If you can find a good version of it, the jazz in that time was too overdone, but if you can find a good, simple version of someone singing Down Here on the Ground, it's a very, very lovely song. And it had a famous line, and Strother Martin plays the leader, the head of a chain gang, and he beats up the prisoners savagely and says, what we have here is a failure to communicate. And that became a very famous line. So Cool Hand Luke is about a guy who commits a minor crime. He's drunk and he starts wrenching the heads off parking meters. He gets arrested and he's sentenced to 2 years on a chain gang in a prison camp run by this sadist. And the guy just decides to break this guy. And Cool Hand Luke he's just a guy, he's just trying to get through his thing, but he just starts to beat him up no matter what he says. If he's a smart aleck, he beats him up. He puts him in a box, this horrible punishment. And Luke has nothing to fight back with. He has no power, and yet he will not be broken, or at least he stands up to this guy. And it starts out with this guy, Dragline, who the guy won George Kennedy won an Oscar for that. Dragline is the tough guy. He's the bull goose loony, they call. He's the bull of the alpha male of the yard, and he beats the living hell out of Luke too, but Luke will not surrender. He just never surrenders. That's the only thing about him. And so they're playing cards one day, and Luke bluffs, and this is how he gets his nickname. Here's that clip.
The man's got kings, get your tail out.
Yeah.
Now you got You want to see him?
Yeah.
Right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
Oh.
Mic'd up, right?
Stupid mullet head, he beat you at nothing. Just like today when he kept coming back at me with nothing.
Yeah, well, sometimes nothing can be a real cool hand.
Move sit in here next to my boy.
Cool Hand Luke, but Cool Hand means he's got nothing, but he's going to play nothing. And it's a beautiful film, very moving. And the idea that this alpha male understands that this guy is unbeatable, he's undefeatable, and that inspires the other people. He's still just a drunk and a petty criminal, but he has freedom. He's free because he's willing to take the pain. And this is the thing. This is what freedom is, right? Freedom is not being afraid. If you're not afraid, then you're free. The deaths of saints tell us why saints are free. This is as opposed to what was sold to us by the news media during COVID, right? When remember Donald Trump came out and said, don't be afraid of COVID, don't let it dominate your life. And this was the reaction of the press.
Don't tell your supporters, don't be afraid of COVID. Everyone should be afraid of COVID.
It's okay to be afraid of COVID, and it's okay that it's dominating your life because it has dominated your life.
So if you want, they say that men can't become women, but Jake Tapper did a good job there. You should be afraid. Well, why do they want you to be afraid? Because then you have to tune in next week. Then you're a slave. If you're afraid, you're a slave. If you're afraid, you're angry. If you're angry, you're a slave. Only when you're fearless, only courage makes you free, because life is hard and there's a lot of pain in it. And sometimes to be free, you got to take the punch. You got to stand up to people. And that is the thing that Jesus gives people, because he says to you, as I said before, that death is less than death and life is more than life. And so you don't have to be afraid. Be not afraid. Jesus says this all the time. Be not afraid. And that's where freedom comes from, because you know what? There's always going to be somebody who wants to take your freedom, and the bigger they are, the more they want it. The more power they have, the more they want to keep that power in play, and the more they know that your individuality and your freedom threatens their power. the only way to be free is to be free. The only way to be free is not to be afraid. And that is the thing that Christ gives you on this Easter when you suddenly realize, oh yeah, they crucified this guy, yet there he is, right? That is where that courage comes from. And it is beautifully, beautifully shown in Cool Hand Luke. Terrific movie, terrific movie. The other is an Oscar winner. Maybe you've seen this one. This is probably the most famous of them, is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975. It won the Oscar, I believe, and obviously Jack Nicholson won as Randall Patrick McMurphy. I've sometimes compared Donald Trump to Randall Patrick McMurphy. I like the book better by Ken Kesey. The novel is absolutely wonderful, and I like it because it uses this kind of trick, literary trick, where the whole thing is told from the position of a crazy person as he slowly becomes sane because of Randall Patrick McMurphy. And the thing is, McMurphy is a petty criminal, gambler, or brawler who is sentenced to prison. And to get out of prison, he pretends to be insane. So he's sent to an insane asylum. Ken Kesey worked in an insane asylum. This is based on this. And the film reflects this kind of growing idea in philosophy. Michel Foucault was saying this at the same time. He was saying people aren't crazy. It's just a definition of society. It's a power. Foucault thought everything was a power structure, and the power structure, defined where madness is. Now that's false. That's foolishness. Some people are mentally ill, but what Kesey is saying here is that it can be done that way. Some things that are considered crazy are just normal. At one point, Randall Patrick McMurphy says to these guys, "You're no crazier than everybody else," and that, I think, is the point. This also is about manhood. The place is dominated by Nurse Ratched. She hates their manhood. She uses every trick she can psychologically to confuse them out of their manhood, out of their convictions, out of their anger. She makes them. There's a wonderful scene where they have a group therapy thing where everything devolves into babbling and craziness and screaming. And through it all, Randall Patrick McMurphy just stands up to her. And the great scene, the best scene, I think, where he stands up to her is when he wants to see the World Series. She manipulates the people so that they won't vote to have the World Series, and she won't let them watch it. So McMurphy sits down in front of a blank screen and starts to announce the World Series as if it's there until all the crazy people gather around him and they can see it too. And here's that clip.
All right, here he comes to the next pitch. Trish swings. It's a line drive ball to deep left center. It's going. It's going. Somebody get me a wiener before I die. I gotta get my belly feeling. All right. Koufax looks down. He's looking at the great Mickey Mantle now. Here comes the pitch. Mantle swings. It's a home run.
Gentlemen, stop this. Stop this immediately.
It's great. Louise Fletcher as Nurse Ratched. She also won an Oscar for this. And why is she so angry? She's angry because they're free. Why are they free? They're free because their minds are free. They're in an asylum. They can't get out. They're locked up. They can't break out. But they're free because their minds are free, and their minds are free because Murphy is unafraid, and McMurphy is unafraid, and he teaches them to be unafraid as well. Each one of these stories, I say these are Christian stories because each one of them follows the pattern of a Christian story. Only the first one, Whistle Down the Wind, involves Jesus directly in the sense that they think this guy is Jesus, but all of them follow the pattern of the Passion story and the resurrection story, and you'll see when you watch them that story is embedded in these stories. And the reason I love to see it is Christian truth embedded in evil, selfish, unrighteous reality is because Christian truth is embedded in evil, selfish, unrighteous reality. It does not transform the world into a happy place. It does not transform you into a righteous person. You will still be the person that you are, but you will grow into something new with Christ. You really will. I've never experienced anything like the personal growth that I have simply in having a relationship with the living God. It's just an amazing thing. But it takes place in reality. It doesn't stop me from having an ego. It doesn't stop me from being annoyed. It doesn't stop me from sometimes being afraid and angry, all of those things. But it's a light. It's like the difference between being lost in a storm and being able to see the North Star so you know what direction you're traveling in. When you leave the truth of reality behind, When you leave the truth of reality behind, you leave the Christian truth behind, because that's where the Christian truth lives. It's not a fantasy. It's not a fantasy. It is the hidden truth of life. It is the uber truth of life, the truth of life that is above life. And these films, Whistle Down the Wind, Cool Hand Luke, and whatchamacallit, the Ken Kesey novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, great examples of how to tell stories about Jesus without getting involved with religion. What great stuff. If you want more, like and subscribe to The Andrew Klavan Show wherever you get your podcasts.